Hello, friends and enemies, heroes and villains, welcome to Epic Realms. Today's guest is an actor and audiobook narrator. His high acclaim and awards makes him in high demand in the audiobook world and loved by audiobook fans. Gerard Doyle, welcome to Epic Realms. How are you?
I'm well indeed. Thank you, Nick. And thank you very much for inviting me on.
I was very excited. You ran across my feed on LinkedIn of all places, and I was like, "Hey, I just got done listening to this guy. I'm gonna reach out to him because I'd love to have him on the show."
What were you listening
And here we
to?
go. I was listening to the latest Chris Paolini book, the Murtagh.
Oh, Murtagh.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
listening to that, and I've listened to the entire series. I'm a big audiobook listener fan. We have a lot of audiobook narrators come on the show, and I was just like, "Gosh, I got to have him on the show." And obviously, I listened to the previous books before Epic Realms had started. And
Right.
so it gave me a reason to, to go, oh man, this is somebody I know. This is somebody whose work I love, and I would love to get them on the show. I reached out, and here we are.
Well, I'm very flattered. Thank you very much.
How young were you when you first started acting? Because you did more than audiobooks for many years.
Well, I was a bit of a late starter, actually. I didn't go to drama school until I was 27.
Okay.
Um, and I had various jobs before then. And I was very fortunate in that I my I landed a job as an acting ASM at the Nuffield Theatre in Southampton in England, and they'd just finished doing a show as part of their season that they were hoping to kind of you know re reconstruct for the West End, and I managed after quite a long time to get an audition for it, which very nearly went very badly wrong. um, anyway, I that's quite a long story if you're interested. But the anyway, I my second job was playing in a wonderful gritty musical called The Hired Man in the West End, and well, it's been downhill from there really.
So you didn't
But
have any actual formal schooling or training at the beginning? It was just kind
I
of,
I went to drama school
okay.
for I was doing a lot of what would you call it? Community theatre, I suppose. Amdram, we call it
Okay.
in England, amateur dramatics, which was really quite good, focused stuff. It wasn't the usual church hall thing. There was a group of three or four of us who were the nucleus of this group, and it taught me a lot about working with audiences in close proximity because some of the venues we played were very small, pub rooms in pubs and things, and the audience was 3 feet away. So to kind of stay in character and just not be intimidated by the proximity of people whose faces you could see and many of whose faces you knew was great training actually, and stood me in good stead when I went to drama school. I was probably the oldest person in the school. I can't remember, maybe 70 students altogether, very
Okay.
small. And it stood me in good stead. I felt I had a lot of background knowledge that I acquired without even realizing it, that I could draw on to kind of progress more quickly, I think, in some ways.
Yeah.
Um, so I was very fortunate in that. And then from drama school, I I, I landed this acting ASM job at this theatre in Southampton, and from that I heard about the show that they'd been doing as part of their season, and I joined it, and we opened at the Theatre Royal in Leicester in England, and then transferred to the West End, and we ran in the West End for 6 months. So it was around the time of the miners' strike in '83 in England, 1983, and I was playing a miner, a union organizer, and the reaction to one particular scene, was just extraordinary sometimes, and it was a really hard time in England,
Yeah.
um, and it went on for months and months, and very bitter and police involved and all sorts. But the reaction to that was quite extraordinary, and it was a lot of fun to do, and it was a great show. So I was very fortunate, and I'd say there are a cast of about 22. A couple have died, unfortunately, since, but there are about 9 of us who are still in touch after 30 odd years, 40 years nearly.
That's fantastic.
And it was a very tight group of people, and again, I learned so much from those around me, and just the experience itself. It was great.
When you decided to go to school for theater,
Yeah.
what was your family's reaction? Were your family behind you on that? Were they like, oh, maybe not so much. It's probably not a good idea. There's no money in theater. A lot of people say that.
Yeah, no, but that was pretty much it, really. I only once did my mother and stepfather lived in Ireland. I was brought up in England by my grandmother for all sorts of reasons.
Okay.
And only once did I worked my way through drama school, working in pubs, and I got a small grant from the local authority.
Okay.
But I was painting the house that I was living in. In fact, the guy ended up paying me to live there. It was kind of nice. So I, all sorts of things to sustain myself. But at one point, I hit a low point, and I had to, ask my mother for money, and she sent me £20, which was a lot of money. They weren't, wealthy people.
Right.
A lot of money then, and a long letter, saying, look, why don't you just give up all this nonsense and get a job in the post office? And that was the kind of the scope of other people's ambition for me,
Right.
And I just knew that, I don't know, when I was about 11, maybe younger, I remember having a thought, I will never have to work in a factory, which was kind of the expectation.
Right.
And I didn't ever work in a factory. I worked in a small printing works and various other jobs that I did. But I knew that I wasn't going to be doing ordinary stuff.
Right.
I did it for, I don't know, 10 years nearly, I suppose, and then broke out of it and became an actor.
Right. You said you were raised by your grandmother?
Yes.
What did she
Yeah.
think? What was her thoughts?
Well, she died a couple of years before I went to drama school.
Oh, okay.
So, she knew I was doing the amateur dramatics and all that. But yeah, she had no
Okay.
inkling of it really. So yeah, it's, in fact, with all respect to her demise kind of freed me up to, kind of explore what I really wanted to do.
Okay.
So yeah.
Did
So
you
yes,
did you
go on,
do a
sorry.
lot of reading growing up? A lot of reading books
I
and
was a
stories and stuff?
very early reader. Um, I think 5 I was reading.
Oh, wow.
I mean, not, not
Yeah, you weren't reading Shakespeare at 5,
not
but
not for a few years after. Um, so yeah, that I was an early reader, and I remember being told off constantly at meal times for having a book propped on the table while I was eating. And we didn't have a television either. I mean, I used to go to friends' houses to watch TV, and then only for an hour, between sort of the end of school and tea time. And yeah, so I was constantly reading, and moved on from picture books to full-length stories, not novels, but stories in story books. So I've got a
yeah.
few of them actually here in the bookshelf behind me still. Um, so yeah, I was an early reader, and I loved it. It just took me away from what I was experiencing around
Right.
me, which wasn't terrible, but it was pretty humdrum.
What type of books did you like when you were younger? And did that stick
Um,
with you growing up?
God, well, mostly kind of adventure stuff, I think. Enid Blyton was before I realised there were certain suspect elements to her writing.
Right.
I've still got a whole nine books of a series, the Island of Adventure, the Sea of Adventure, with the same characters, recurring characters, and when I remember, I would curl up in a chair and I would tear the corner off the top of the page and eat it and put it in my ear. I had a terrible, and at one point I had to go to the doctors. My grandmother took me to the doctor and he pulled out all this paper out of my ear. And I blamed my friend's mother for doing it. The most extraordinary thing. But yeah, that was because it was an unconscious habit, and
Yeah.
I've got the books here with all the corners torn off. But after that stage, I realized it wasn't a great thing to do with books, so I stopped.
Yeah, that's probably good.
But I enjoyed in my teen years and older, books about the English countryside and um, crafts and everything else that are dead now. And in fact, my wife for Christmas bought me a wonderful book called Craftland, which was about exactly that. And I had I was supposed to be busy recording, but I breezed through this book, and I lent it last night to a friend of mine he's from Yorkshire, and he lives nearby. And yeah, I still haven't lost that, and I'm constantly watching things like the Repair Shop and
Yeah.
whatnot on TV. So that was, I do love I'm very much in love with the countryside and country life, in a shamelessly nostalgic way.
Do you do woodwork and stuff like that?
No,
No? Just
God,
like
I don't
watching
do
it?
anything. I do a bit of painting and decorating, but not, I've always loved watching other people work. And I know that sounds kind of, I love work. I love work. I can watch it all day. But no, if people came to the house to do repairs or whatnot, it was just such a thrill to just, quietly sit and watch them. I remember, let me know if I'm rambling.
No, that's
At,
okay. We're fine.
at the age of 8 or 9, I used to go to Ireland to visit very frequently for months at a time because I went to a convent school and we had 15 weeks holiday in the summer. And just up the road from where my mother and stepfather had a house, there was a little broken down, kind of garage, just a one-car garage that was a forge for a guy who used to shoe horses, because in the 50s in Ireland, most transport was still horse-drawn
Right.
in rural areas. So this guy was busy, and I gradually, I became fascinated by watching him. And I don't ever remember speaking to the guy, um, but I gradually kind of worked my way in from leaning against the doorpost to standing inside, and eventually he had this huge bellows that, it was enormous. It must have been 8 feet long, and I would work it. And as it went up, I'd be lifted off the floor. It was like bell ringing, and yeah, so stuff like that. And near the school where I went to, my secondary modern school in Baldock, which was Baldock in Hertfordshire, is where I brought up, and they trained you to be factory fodder, basically. Um, a few aspired to do other things. Very few went off to university, but some went into jobs like teaching and things. But right next to it was a wheelwright, and he would make cartwheels.
Wow.
And so the whole process would go on in his yard, and I was often late for school, just standing there watching him. And just fascinating. And of course, all those crafts are very rare now, but I feel very privileged to have had hands-on
You're right.
experience, as
Right.
it
That's
were.
really fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. So and it's funny how often in books, things like that help me relate to the content
What
of
you're
the
reading,
book.
yeah.
I was working in a theatre company in the Midlands in England, and the director and his wife lived on a canal boat, a 72-foot 6, 8 feet wide canal boat. And I stayed with them for the 3 months of our little mini tour. And I think the third book I recorded, or fourth book I recorded for an author called Deborah Crombie, who writes murder mysteries.
Yeah.
She lives in Texas, but all her murder mysteries are set in England, in London particularly. And she had this one about, stuff going on, murders going on the canal. And it was just wonderful. And part of it was near where I actually lived, because
Wow.
the Grand Union Canal went within 15 miles of where I live. So, all those things really kind of added a real sense of genuineness, authenticity to my perception of what was going on.
Right.
So it's very interesting how all these arcane little interests that I had have come home to roost and been very useful. Thank goodness.
So why did you choose acting over crafting or building or one of those kinds of things?
I don't know. Um, I I just felt comfortable on stage. I mean, I was an oddball at school, at secondary school, and well, I went to a convent school as well. And, I wasn't exactly part of the mainstream there. And I can remember the first time I went on stage was my last week at convent school. I was the genie in a play called The Genie of the Lamp, and I just, wow, this, it just felt right.
Yeah.
And then I eventually joined the drama club at the secondary school, and I felt at home. I felt safe on the stage, and it's very interesting. I've heard several very well-known actors saying the same thing, that they felt the stage for them was a place of safety and comfort.
Right.
And I mean, it's still got its challenges,
Oh yeah,
and
for sure.
never take it for granted. But I feel at home on a stage.
Early on in your career, speaking of challenges, early on in your acting and theater career, what were some of the big challenges for you, both on stage and in life?
Um, well, getting work. I was lucky to get the first job, and then it became more difficult. So finding the work was a challenge, and I found myself having to kind of do. Well, I did painting and decorating in between, and but trying to anything that wouldn't become a career, um, that would distract me from what I wanted to do. So the painting and decorating was casual work. I did a lot of work for friends. And um, I can say it now. Years ago, I was signing on for unemployment benefit as well, and I one of the guys who was head of the kind of flying squad for the social security people who paid the benefit. They would go around and check on people to see if they were working. And one of the guys I knew at a theatre opposite where I lived, that I was part of, was the head of that flying squad, and he would let me know, just back off from the work for a minute because we're going to be in the area. And I ended up painting his entire house, for backhanded payments. Just stuff like that was quite amusing. But yeah, so finding the work was a challenge. But on getting the work, I realized how little I knew really. Um, uh, and it was kind of intimidating, but to be given the opportunity to learn from people who, some really very, very good people that I worked with. Um, and I, sorry, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here.
It's okay.
I never did a Shakespeare play at drama school. I mean, it was not one of the top line drama schools, but I did leave with my equity card. That was having paid them their money, their fee. They would release you from part of the course if you got a job that was offering an equity card. And I managed to do that without having to leave the college, but I left college with an equity card. And why am I telling you that? I can't remember now. But
That's
anyway,
okay.
it was, sorry.
So that's
Oh,
okay.
it was, I was able to kind of go straight into the profession. And I've definitely lost my thread. I do apologize.
We were talking about some challenges that you had on the.
Yeah. Um, oh, yes. I'd never done a Shakespeare play. And again, by a sheer fluke, several flukes, I got a job in 89, 90 with the English Shakespeare Company, which was a touring company. It wasn't the Royal Shakespeare Company. And I'd done one version of Macbeth and The Tempest
Okay.
by then. That was all I'd done in terms of Shakespeare, and kind of started to get the hang of it. But what connected me with Shakespeare's language was I grew up with an Irish accent until I was 5 or 6. Even though I was living in England, the household all spoke with an Irish accent. And years later, I realized that there was a connection between the way the Irish, in my mind anyway, whether this is true for anybody or else, I don't know. But in my mind, there was a connection between the way the Irish used the English language and the way Shakespeare used it. And that kind of eased my anxiety about Shakespeare. And I started to get it. And I got a job with the English Shakespeare Company, excuse me, understudying, playing small roles, but understudying larger ones. I mean, much larger ones. And I learned by listening to what was going on over the show relay or standing in the wings unobtrusively and watching really good people doing it well, and watching, some people who should know better doing it not so well, and making choices, and sorting out the difference between what made sense and what didn't in the way Shakespeare was delivered by different people. And so that was a huge kind of education for me, overcoming that challenge.
Yeah.
But I'd already kind of got a head start because of my association with the Irish, um, and just being intimidated by really good actors, and mostly feeling privileged to be working at all, let alone with good people.
Right. For
So
sure.
it was, and it's the same with audiobooks. I mean, I couldn't believe it when I got my first audiobook, and I'm still intimidated by pretty much every book I I take on. You mentioned the Eragon books,
Right.
Christopher Paolini. Jesus Christ, that's there's a lot of stuff in there that
Right.
is very, very challenging, and those are the only books that I record nowadays with a director. And until Murtagh, which I recorded at home, I would be in the city recording those with a director and an engineer, and Chris Paolini would be, you know, zooming in or whatever, or phoning with responses to questions about. I mean, he produced whole lists of pronunciations
Wow.
for us because he invented 3 languages
Right.
based on Old Norse. I mean, there's no need for anybody to be that clever.
Right.
And and so he was very proactive in. I hope to be doing more. Very proactive in making sure that every pronunciation is accurate. And then of course when it he would cut CDs in the early days and send those, and we'd have it from the horse's mouth, as it were.
Right.
So yeah, I'm dodging all over the
No,
place
that's
here.
okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because a lot of times when I talk to audiobook narrators, a lot of times they say that the author doesn't really, they're oftentimes hands off, or they were hands off, or sometimes they weren't even allowed to talk to the authors. It's just like, here's the book, don't talk to the author. But here we've
That
got Chris Paolini that's just being hands on, and here's all the information you need. How can I help you do this better. And
Yeah.
that's really refreshing and fun to hear. And not all authors, don't get me wrong.
No, but I think he was he was so young. What was he, 15 or something when he
Right.
began the first book? So that kind of youthful exuberance, and of course he couldn't believe I'm putting words in his mouth, but I'm sure, like any 15-year-old, he couldn't believe that his book was, going to be put out on such a scale. Um, and he was absolutely, you know, involved anytime we wanted him to be. And it's been the same since for all the books. He's great to work with. So yeah, but I'm still intimidated by
Right.
the number of characters, the kind of characters that he writes, the creatures and everything else, and um,
Do you still find that that's the case with other authors? Have you seen that evolution in your time where were you early on told, yeah, we don't talk to the authors?
yeah. Well, I wasn't told it, but it just, nobody offered it, and I was so naive that I didn't even think to ask. I just thought I'd have to figure it out for myself. Most of the stuff I did at the beginning was for recorded books, who are now RB Media, and they still have, I think, their own research people who will research pronunciations for a narrator.
Right.
But by and large nowadays, you do your own research, and if you're really stuck, then you contact the publisher and say, look, for God's sake, find a source for this because I can't. And the response is usually very positive.
Okay.
But nowadays, thank goodness, I'm in much closer contact with most of the authors I work for. Adrian McKinty is a case in point. I love his books. They're murder mysteries set in Northern Ireland during the times of the Troubles.
Okay.
And his protagonist is a Catholic cop, a detective sergeant. He begins with in a Protestant police force during the sectarian wars in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
So he's got all that background of the strife and the danger and the skullduggery and everything else, and he's got to solve these mysteries.
Right.
And it's brilliant. It's brilliant. Am I allowed to curse on
Yes, you
this?
can curse as much as you
Okay.
want.
So McKinty and I, thank goodness, we have a really lovely relationship. But in the early days, I thought that he didn't like what I did. I saw something on his blog, I think, and I'd recorded 2 or 3 of his books, and I saw something that made me think this guy doesn't doesn't have any respect for what I'm doing. And then he wrote a trilogy, a kids trilogy, fantasy, and made up all these words. And I called the publisher, and they said, well, we don't know. Call the author. He lived in Australia at the time,
Right.
and so
And were you in the States at this time, or are you
yeah, I
still
was.
in?
Yeah,
Okay.
I had a full-time teaching job as well at the time in a private school just up the road. So I've got no teaching qualifications, but they didn't seem to care about that as long as I had some kind of experience and a big mouth and an English accent. And not much going on in here, but the stuff that came out sounded good. But anyway, I remember being in school and calling his literary agent, um, and in some trepidation because I really thought that these people didn't like me. And I said, "Oh, hello, my name's Gerard Doyle. You don't know me, but oh my God, we fucking love you, man!" And what? And it was apparently, the audiobooks were kind of taking off in and boosting the print sales. And I was mistaken. So he put me in touch with Adrian in Melbourne, Australia. And I remember the first conversation we had was on my birthday years ago, at 7 o'clock in the morning, my time. And, I was saying, right. So and we chatted and everything else. I said, right. So I've got this list of pronunciations. And he said, I don't fucking know. Say what the fuck you like. I don't care. No, that's not the way it works. My name's on this. And, I said, look, but you invented these words. You've got to tell me, ah, geez, all right. So, and very reluctantly, he actually had a conversation with me, and that he's kind of kept that up since as a kind of joke, but he's not written any more kids' fantasies, thank God. Anyway, so yeah, how did we get onto that? I don't know.
That's
But
funny.
just contact with
The
authors.
authors, yeah.
Yeah, and Mick Herron has been great as well for the Slow Horses books, and his print publisher too. They're magnificent. And Deborah Crombie, I love talking to her, and I've got her onto Adrian McKinty now as well. I've been talking about. She loves it. So yeah, it's lovely having direct contact with the author and feeling comfortable about just calling about anything. And thank goodness they all live Mick Herron's still in England, but Deborah's in Texas and Adrian's in New York now. So it's a quick phone call, not
Yeah,
scheduling something 12 hours apart. So
right.
it's much easier.
Going
Anyway,
back to acting, what was the big shift between from stage to doing screen acting and television and stuff like that for you? How did that shift happen, and how different was it for you to go from like blocking is different on stage than it is in front of a camera, right?
yeah. Well, I actually don't think I was very good at television acting because I couldn't lose. I wasn't flexible enough as well. I didn't get enough experience of it anyway, to be honest. I only did, I don't know, 3 or 4, maybe 5 or 6 things on British TV. And I could never kind of relax. I always felt that I had to know my lines and I had to, be in the right place. And I put myself under unnecessary pressure. And I always felt that came across slightly in the performances, but I've always been very kind of self-critical anyway. So I,
Aren't we
you know,
all? Aren't we all?
that's for others to judge. But yeah, it was an awkward transition, but I mean I enjoyed the work. What I did a series called The Bill in England, which was like a police procedural thing. And it was like a sausage factory for actors. Every actor in the country has been on the bill
Okay.
several times, including me. Excuse me. And anyway, I had my lines perfect and da da da. And it was the last day of shooting for this particular episode. And we're in this tiny office and some of the crew were there. The director was down the corridor, and the cast were just clowning around. It was like the last day of school, and I'm thinking, what and one of the actors hadn't got any of his lines memorized, and he was sitting at a desk in close up, and he had the script here down by his side, and it was just like I'm thinking, what was I so nervous about? Anyway, um, yeah, secrets of the trade, eh? But
Right.
but I got the work because I had a good agent, and they got me some TV work, and but it was mostly theatre, and I just I love theatre. It's just a magical place to be, really. And if something goes wrong, which has happened on more occasions than I care to enumerate, you've got to figure it out there and then. And the wonderful kind of rapport that you can build up with fellow actors can just help that to be seamless. Can I give you an example?
Sure.
Okay, so again, in my amateur days, I was doing the importance of being earnest. I was playing Algernon,
Okay.
and I'm by no means an upper class person, but I had to cut. And he's got 2 lines, very similar, but 5 pages apart in the script, right? And there's a lot of important stuff in the middle that if you miss it, you're kind of screwed. So I must have had a momentary lapse of concentration this particular night, and I was just two-hander, myself and the guy playing Jack, and I said the wrong line, and we carried on from the point where we would have been if it had been the right line.
Right.
And I realized some way in, oh shit, I've screwed up. We've got all that stuff and he was looking at me, and it came to me what I needed to do. And I just looked at him, and I knew there's something passed between us. And I went back to where I'd made the mistake, did the 5 pages in between, got to where I'd made the mistake, and I skipped the bit we'd done instead of what we should have done, and picked it up immediately. And the end of the scene came not nearly quickly enough. And I walked off stage sweating and shaking. And I said, "Oh my God, I am so, so sorry." He said, "It's all right, mate. I could see you knew what you were doing." Yeah, it was just one of those magical moments
Yeah.
that the two actors, know each other's mind, as it were. And it's happened more times than I care to say, really. Usually my fault.
But there's always stuff when it comes to stage. There's always mistakes, and it's how you make sure the audience doesn't. The key is making sure the audience doesn't know there was a mistake, right?
Well, yeah, except when I was doing a production of Macbeth in Chicago, actually, on tour with the English Shakespeare Company. We toured the world. I mean, it was marvelous.
Right.
2 years, and we were in Chicago, and we had these little farty. It was all modern dress. And I was playing one of the murderers who murdered Macduff's kids. My mate Sean had a gun. Sean Gilder is a wonderful actor, and he also had a knife for his character. And we had these farty little pop gun things. They wouldn't allow us to use, starting pistols or anything that made a gun-like noise. Whereas in England, we'd just rent, fake guns, and they'd blow your head off,
Right.
blow your ears off.
Right.
And anyway, so we're on stage, and I went to shoot this, Lady Macduff, and the stage manager was supposed to pull the trigger of the starting pistol, and he didn't. And I'm standing there clicking this fucking trigger, and I kind of looked at him, and he was doing something else. And I just said to Sean Gilder, "Oh, just kill him," and walked off. And I got ripped a new one by the director because it was obvious that wasn't a little line written by Shakespeare.
Right. What happens? You've done so much. You just talked about touring with the company, right?
Yeah.
You've performed in London, television, Broadway, all of this. At what point do you look back and go, "Oh, now I've made it," and then you hit another scale, "Now I've made it"? Does that ever happen, or are
No,
you
I
just
don't.
constantly like, "I haven't made it"?
What I focus on, unfortunately, in this late in life, I'm 75 in July, are the opportunities that I let slip by because of naivety or lack of commitment, or just allowing circumstances to get in the way. And yeah, I don't feel that you know I've every good job I've had, I've fallen into, including audiobooks. I got my first audiobook because I was understudying on Broadway in The Weir, a wonderful play in 1990. And towards the end of the run, my agent at Henderson Hogan called and said, there's a company looking to do an audiobook, and they want an Irish accent. And I got it, and it was between me and the guy that I was understudying, and I got it. And so I kind of fell into that. I fell into the English Shakespeare Company. I can't even tell you that story because it's too long. I fell into the Hired Man, the West End musical. I definitely can't tell you that story, but it just it's been a series of fortunate accidents, really, and not that much of it has been through my drive, and that's what I kind of kick myself for.
You mentioned you kind of fell into doing audiobooks. They need someone with an Irish accent.
Yeah.
Did that just do so well that everyone's just started going like, "Hey, we want you to do this, and then we want you to do this," and it just shifted to audiobooks? or was
Yeah,
it longer and
pretty
slower?
pretty much. I did that. I did actually. Well, and just before COVID, I found myself having to kind of try and drum up audiobook work. So I started sending out emails. But for many years, I didn't lift a finger. I would get 15 books a year without asking for them. And I had a full-time teaching job as well.
Right.
But the first audiobook was A Star Called Henry by Roddy Doyle. Brilliant book. Part of a trilogy. I got to record the third one, but not the middle one for some reason. It got an earphones award from Audiophile magazine, which, for my first audiobook was quite extraordinary.
Right.
But I was so how can I put it? I was so hesitant at the beginning because I'd never done one before, that when I got to the end, Claudia Howard, wonderful producer at Recorded Books, called me in and she said, right, I'm going to sit you down and I'm going to play you the first hello. This is my dog Sylvie. Anyway, so she said, I'm going to play you the first part, some of the first part of the book, and then play you the end. And it sounded like chalk and cheese. I was just unbelievably different. I was so tentative and disconnected and just not embracing the story at the beginning. But by the end of it, I was the character.
Right.
And so she made me re-record the first 60 odd pages, and then matched it, and they got an award. And as a result of that, then we went back to England. We were here for a kind of trial period while I was working on Broadway. And then 9/11 happened. When just on the day before I was supposed to be recording my second audiobook for Recorded Books. And so it was a while after that I started to do more. And then after that, I sent out 16 CDs. I'd done maybe 8 books by the time, not including, this was before Eragon. And I sent out 16 CDs, and I got a number of responses, including from Taro Meyer, who was casting and directing Eragon.
Oh.
And God bless her, she's written a book about audiobook recording, and she mentions me in it as to why she gave me the job. And it was very nice. So yeah, I that was the only time I really lifted a finger early in my audiobook career to get work, and it just started coming in. I did actually cold call Blackstone Audio in 2003, I think.
Okay.
And as a result of a 45-minute conversation with Hayla Williams, who's a wonderful producer there, I got my first Adrian McKinty. And God bless him, he just keeps churning them out every 2 years.
Right.
And I'm fortunate that a number of authors have kind of said, you're my man.
Yeah. I love
Including
that. I love hearing that about anyone.
It's great. And they don't write fast enough, but Adrian and Deborah, and a few others, and Christopher so far, so the series really help. They're not just one-offs, so it's been wonderful, really, and it always takes me by surprise when somebody offers me a book to record, and it's I love it. I love prepping a book without the pressure of actually recording it.
Yeah.
Reading it with pleasure and purpose.
There's something to be said about being a audiobook listener and having the same narrator for the entire series, because I've had so many series where you listen to one audiobook narrator and then it's changed and they pronounce words differently, they sound differently, the character's different, and sometimes you're attached to one version over the other, and it gets it more difficult to continue the series in audiobook because it changes. And so it's always refreshing when an author's like, no, I want the same narrator for my entire series. So I always love that.
Some listeners to the Eragon series might disagree with you on that, because I've had some very negative feedback about my choice of the voice for Saphira, the dragon, and it kills me to do it, but I'm stuck with it now. But I'm gonna tell the world, why not? I had about 10 days to prepare that book. I had no notice at all. Um, and again, it was early in my career, and I skimmed through it. I didn't have time to go into detail. And in fact, when we started recording, I was pre-reading the first part of it the night before to bring fresh into the studio. And I did that all the way through the book. Every night I'd go back home or wherever I was staying and pre-read what I had to do the next day. And I've never admitted this publicly before. I forgot that they communicate telepathically. And I was thinking this huge beast, try and give depth to the voice, but allowing room for some character and emotion and everything else, which I think I've achieved mostly with Sophia, even though she talks like that.
Right.
God, that hurts. But I remember Tara Meyer. I was sitting in the same recording booth in I can't remember the name of the studio now in New York, that Jim Dale had just finished recording the one of the Harry Potter books.
Right.
And the executive producer for that, Tim Ditlow, was the executive producer for the Eragon book. And all Jim Dale's notes and photographs and all sorts of stuff were plastered. I wish I'd got a cardboard box and packed them all in and take them away. I had no idea. Anyway, so I'm sitting in there, and I come to the voice of the dragon, and Taro stopped me. She said, "Oh," very kind of Jewish mother. "Oh, is that the voice you're going to use?" And I said, "Well, yeah." Oh, she said, "Okay, all right, fine." Not realizing that this was going to be ongoing for years and years and years.
Right. You're going to wreck your
And
voice.
that the bugger Paolini was going to introduce several other dragons. And by the time we got to Eldest, how many were there?
A lot.
A lot. A lot of dragons. More than you can shake a stick at. So again, my naivety and just the pressure of time led me to make what too many people unfortunately think was an error of choice in terms of the character voice, and it's certainly hard to do it.
Yeah.
So but yeah. Anyway,
You took some time off from, he took some time off from making those books and then returned to make Murtagh. How was it for you to re-get the voices? Because you said on a couple other locations that like it was a process to get those voices back. What was that like to try and get those voices back?
Well, fortunately, we lifted the voice samples from the previous books, and it, it wasn't that difficult, except my own voice had changed.
Right.
So I had to kind of work to reconnect with it, with them, the voices. But no, I mean, a lot of the work was kind of done for me. I'm sorry to rob it of any I'm sorry, I'm moving my chair. I'm sorry to rob it of any mystique, but there were other people working much harder than I was to achieve that.
Right.
And fair play to them. I was very lucky. Orly Moscovitz, who was the producer, called me about Murtagh after, what was it, 5 years, I think, since Inheritance, and he'd done the what is it, The Fort, the Witch, and the Worm, and some other
the shorter
books,
works,
and some science fiction, I think, as well. But she called me nearly 2.5 years ago now, and said, we'd like to record this, but we want you to do it at home, and we want you to engineer it as well. And I said, absolutely no way. Am I going to? I mean, I make so many mistakes every hour.
right.
I mean, especially now, it's embarrassing, and I'm delighted that I work on my own because I have nobody to feel embarrassed in front of. But I said, no, I can't do that. I can't, because an engineer has to mark every error, not only in the script but on the Pro Tools window as well.
Right.
I said, I can't do. I don't know how to do it anyway. So she said, okay, well, but can you record at home? I said, sure, but I'm going to need links to people who know what they're doing. And she said, well, we'll get you somebody from our pool of audio engineers. I said, well, actually, no, I've got one here. My son, Aidan, is a brilliant audio engineer, and he was staying with us at the time. And he just, Richie Romaniello, who was head of studio at Penguin Random House at the time, liked what they talked, and Richie sent over a $2,500 microphone. I had to hang in my little booth, so we got the sound match better.
Right.
And Aidan just took it on and directed it, and we had a Zoom link to Taro Meyer, who was in California, and he managed it absolutely brilliantly. And it was a joy to work on, just because I was getting feedback from him in when we had breaks and whatnot, and it was very, very supportive. So
How cool is that? How cool is that now to work with your son?
Great. Well, I hope he enjoys it as much as I do. He's very meticulous about not just the electronics, but he's got a very good ear.
Yeah.
Picking up differences in pronunciation rate. If I slow down or if I take a breath in the wrong place, he's very quick, and not intrusive, but and sometimes he'll just let me run with it, and then at the end say, right, Dad, we need to go back and do this. So it's just wonderful to work with him, and we've done 3 or 4 projects now. That was the first one, and I just finished back in November. I finished a kids book for an English author, a very kind of dark but funny children's book, and Aidan did all the post production on that, and sorted out my mistakes retrospectively, bless him. So yeah, it's a great pleasure, and I hope he feels the same way.
Good. I hope so too. I would imagine so. I would have loved to, have that kind of a relationship. In 2021, there was a book that came out called The Last Hummingbird of West Chile, and you just recently recorded that, and that's been released. Tell us a little bit about that, because that sounds like a fascinating book.
Okay, well, I'd never heard of it, and I got an email from Nick Ruddock, who wrote it, saying, look, I've got this book, and never done this before, but I want to record. I want an audiobook of it. And he said, I've been listening to you doing Adrian McKinty's books during COVID and or post COVID, and he said, I want you to do it, or I'm just not going to bother. So I said, well, I'd be delighted to, but I can only get it so far. And Aidan did some work on that as well. But it needs to be mastered and everything else. So I'll try and find you a publisher. And fortunately, I had a lovely relationship with a woman called Carlin Craig, Nick is in Canada, by the way. He's on the east coast of Canada, and my friend Carlin runs Post-Hypnotic Press on the west coast of Canada. So I put them in touch, and that established that, and then I recorded the book at home. And it's an amazing story. It's set in it's the 18th century, and it's about a wealthy family whose the patriarch is oppressive and drunk and everything else, and 2 children are born. Um, 3 children are born, one of whom dies, and anyway, the 2 survivors are abused and everything else, and the boy grows up and just says, right, I'm off, but the daughter is betrothed to marry this kind of ruffian who's a friend of the father's, and the boy goes off around the world, and it's so complicated. It's written from 22 different perspectives, including the hummingbird, who's very vocal throughout, rather vain and a little bit kind of prissy hummingbird, but they are beautiful, so I understand that. But also there's a white pine tree that is felled somewhere in the Adirondacks or somewhere, and is shipped to England and turned into the stern part of a ship, a sailing ship, which gets wrecked in a storm, and it turns out that our lad is on that ship, our hero,
Okay.
and he survives the being drowned at sea by using the end of the ship, the stern of the ship as a raft. But the wood of the ship is talking to us. The pine is
That's
talking to us,
fascinating.
and and um, and the hummingbird, and he ends up on an island in the Pacific. So there are various natives there. There's a girl he falls in love with. He's treated with great suspicion by the head man's assistant, the kind of second in command, who accuses him of all sorts of things, and then he passes sentence on him that he's going to have to run the race of being chased by 2 or 3 wild boars through the forests. And so we hear from their point of view as well, the wild boar.
That's crazy.
Um,
So you get people, you have animals, trees, and they're all like characters in the
yeah,
story.
and a hut that's a kind of brothel in Singapore, a Singapore merchant and his wife and the doctor, and what else? And an ass in Egypt, and a scorpion in Egypt, and just all these
That's,
characters and
but it
two
all melds. It
nuns.
all melds into a great story.
Absolutely,
That's amazing.
absolutely. It's an incredible, far-reaching romp of a story, and it was very difficult to do, but I had a blast doing it, and thank goodness I've never done this before. In fact, I've never worked directly for an author before. As I was, recording chapters, I would make an MP3 and send it off to Nick, to the author, and he had a few little comments here and there, but nothing major, thank goodness. And he was very patient with me because it kind of overran because I had other projects. And we got it. We finally got it published in whenever it was, September, October, I think,
Awesome.
last year.
So people definitely need to go and check that out.
Well, I'm, if I love working directly with authors. I discovered, and so the English author has got 2 more in the pipeline,
Mm.
I hope. So if they're coming my way, I'll be more than happy.
And you've done some recent stuff again for Mick Herron. Of course, he's done
Mick
a lot
Herron,
of done. You've done a lot of stuff with them, and
yeah,
of course, what 10th anniversary did you tell me earlier?
yes, the Slow Horses series, or Slough House series, as the books are called. The Slow Horses are now on Apple TV, and great. We're in the 5th season now, I think. Wonderful adaptation of the books, but you know, I don't mean to denigrate it at all because it's brilliant. But the depth of the books cannot possibly be conveyed in a 1 hour episode.
Right.
And I just love, God, the tangents and the language and the sly humor and all sorts of wonderful things that he's got a tremendous writing style. And I recorded the first book 10 years ago, Slow Horses. And anyway, for some reason, Recorded Books, RB Media, wanted me to record it again, which I did for the 10th anniversary. And that was published. It's being published, I think, on the 13th of January, actually. Um, and then they also offered me, I've done 9 books in that series, plus a few short stories of his, novellas, and I've just been given a one-off, what do you call it? I forget the name. Anyway, just a one-off book called Reconstruction,
Okay.
which is very tangentially involved with one character from Slough House, but there is an element of the spy world in it.
Okay.
But the main story is about people who are not involved in the spy world and can't figure out what's going on. And
Okay.
it's brilliant, very disturbing, dark story, but again, brilliantly written.
Awesome.
So I love recording his books.
That's
He
great. So you got
he
that
he and
coming out.
Huh?
So you got that
So
coming out here this month?
I believe that's coming out in. I know the English version is coming out in March, recorded by a woman, a female narrator. So I don't know whether it's going to be a simultaneous publication. But what I love about both Mick Herron and Adrian McKinty, they insert humour in the most inappropriate place in the book, and it works beautifully. I'm sitting there. I mean, I've pre-read the book, obviously, but you know, sometimes these things are so funny, but I simply can't continue. I just have to stop and get it out of my system. Maybe take the dog out, go for a walk, come back, and try and pick it up, in a rather more serious, or at least, not letting the audience know how funny I find it, because that's not my job. And so very, very fortunate to be recording for such brilliant, brilliant writers.
Any other projects you have coming out that our audience should know about? Make sure to check out.
Well, I'm hoping that Deborah Crombie has got another book in the pipeline. I don't quite know when that's coming out yet, and I don't know. I'm kind of flying by the seat of my pants at the moment, work-wise. But I've had a bit of a tough run. I had 3 books back to back. I was getting up at 5:15 in the morning, because I've got construction going on in the house next door as well. That's been going on since God knows when, November. So yeah, just when I started recording the first book, they started working. So I got up at 5:15, saw my wife off to work, went down into my booth, recorded until 8 when they start, and then back in again at 4 o'clock when it got dark, and they left. And that's been like that I did 8, and when I wasn't recording, I was prepping. So I did 8 straight weeks of that, weekends as well, for doing 3 books back to back, including the Slow Horses one. And I was exhausted. I am exhausted, but I'm just embarking on the reconstruction now, but I've got a little bit more leisure time with that. So I'm not so anxious about this noise going on. So yeah, it's been tough. So I'm not desperately unhappy about taking a little time out, to be honest. But I would like the work.
Yeah.
Sure,
it'll start coming back in.
Well, as my mother used to say, sure, God is good, and the devil isn't a bad fellow when you get to know him well.
I love it. People can find you at GerardDoyleVoice.com. You're right on over there. People can find your social media. You have a little bit of a social media presence. They can find that through your website. I think they got your Facebook link and your LinkedIn link are both on your main website, along with all kinds of other information on there. So GerardDoyleVoice.com. Go ahead and check that out, everybody. For those that are watching in the live stream, stick around. We're going to get to your live stream Q&A questions with Gerard Doyle here in just a little bit. But first, I want to tell you what's coming up on Epic Realms. We're going to be having a special episode with 3 amazing guests who have both already appeared on Epic Realms, all returning. Authors Hunter Blaine and Justin Leslie, as well as Audiobook Hall of Fame narrator Luke Daniels, will all be joining us at the same time for a live February 2nd episode to talk about their upcoming project they've got going on. So that podcast will hit feeds on February 3rd. Again, the show will be live February 2nd. Podcast feeds February 3rd. Of course, down the road on the calendar, appearances by authors Joe Prozit, Justin Rose, Jarrett Melendez, and so many more. So please follow, subscribe, rate, and review. It helps us, and in turn, helps our guests. So, for Gerard Doyle, I am Nick, and I want to thank you all for listening to Epic Realms.